Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luhr, and I'm thrilled to have another rock star of the sports industry on the phone with me here today, all the way from Philadelphia, Mr. Scott O'Neill. Hi, Scott.
Marcus, it's good to be here with you.
Yeah, great to have you, Scott. And before we get started, let me quickly introduce you to our listeners. So Scott is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment Group, which has a very, very illustrious portfolio and entities from the Philadelphia 76ers, the NBA team, of course, the New Jersey Devils, NHL, the Prudential Center, one of the top arenas in the U.S., based in New Jersey, Dignitas, an international eSports organization, and just to name another one, the Sixers Innovation Lab. So all very unique assets, and we'll be talking more about it during the next hour. Scott also currently is the co-managing partner of Elevate Sports Ventures, which is an interesting partnership between SBNI, Live Nation, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Oakview Group. So again, hopefully we have a chance to talk a bit about it. In a general sense, Scott spent really the last 20 years around the NBA, NHL, NFL, leading major assets there. But how we met, I believe, was when you were the president of Madison Square Garden. So again, obviously an unbelievable venue, maybe the most famous arena in the world, and of course the home of the Knicks as well as the Rangers. And I believe prior to that, you spent some of your formative years, I guess, with the NBA. For 8 years and had a couple of other roles prior to that in other organizations. So I think it's, you're well known in the Philadelphia area. Hopefully soon you'll be well known all around the world. I know you speak at conferences as well. So this is really what this podcast is all about, is just take that message around the major learning you've had and other people have in our industry. You've been here, for many decades. So just to frame the podcast today really is all about, of course, what happens in the American sports market, which is very, very different, than many other around the world. So I look forward to digging deep into it and hearing your amazing story, Scott.
Well, thank you for that. I'm just looking to add to my bio, friend of Marcus. I need to put that on the next one. And I've been spending quite a bit more time in Asia, so I'd love to dig into that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We will always try to make sure that we have a little bit of that crossover. So, it's evening here for me. It's a good morning for you there in Philadelphia. So perfect time to have a good chat amongst friends here. And now we always start, and that's really how sort of the whole idea came about, is that this is all about storytelling, and sharing something which, you wouldn't necessarily read in the newspaper, or in sort of general articles. So love to just get you warmed up a bit, with one of your, early days in the industry, how you got in there, and share some fun story with us.
Sure. I can tell you I went to a small school outside of Philadelphia. It's called Villanova University. It happens to be a basketball powerhouse now, but wasn't when I was there. They've won a couple national titles here in the last few years. It was an incredible coach in Jerry Wright. But nonetheless, I was at Villanova and graduated. Kind of a utility knife type student. I love to learn, so I was taking crazy electives. Like I took a couple semesters of calculus. I took a couple semesters of Japanese. I took a couple semesters of advanced stats, and those were my electives. Right. So I definitely was a bit of a glutton for punishment. Loved to be in the classroom. Loved to learn. Fell in love with the students. Was involved all around campus, and graduated without a job in 1992 and went to the beach, which is it's called the Shore here, the Jersey Shore. And I was working as a bouncer in a bar. I don't know if that's the term they use in Asia, but effectively I was supposedly the muscle if there were any problems. And if you know me, that's very unlikely.
Yeah.
Both being the muscle and throwing anybody out. Right. And I was rooming we'd rented a house, and a bunch of my friends said, we're heading to accounting firms. One was getting his PhD in chemistry. Another one was going to med school. Another one was going into sales. And I was the only one that did not have a job or an opportunity. And and hadn't really contemplated it or thought about it too much. And they thought that was funny because my reputation was I was like the driven one and the one always taking extra credits, and I never missed a class. And, so they kind of my friends got a kick out of that. Right. And I hadn't even actually thought about it. And, but apparently my mother had. And so she was a leadership development trainer, and she had been training companies all over the world, Xerox and ADP and Texaco and McDonald's. And she called me one time at the shore, and this is pre-cell phones, just give you a sense of how old I am, and said, hey, you need to be interviewing for a job. And I said, yeah, I'm not really ready to do that. And so she said, well, good news. I've got a friend of mine who I've worked with for the last 10 years. He's a sales manager for ADP, which is a check processing company. If you think about the dynamic industry of check processing, it's almost like sports, except in payroll. It's the payroll version of basketball. Right. And so the gentleman's name, may he rest in peace, his name is Paul Bugley, who passed away recently, unfortunately. But I went in for I was driving back from the Jersey Shore, the beach, to Philadelphia. I was going to stay at a friend's house who was doing a 5th year at Villanova. And unfortunately, my car broke down on the way there. So I got out and hitchhiked back to his room, and got back to his room at 2-3 in the morning. Woke up the next day, and I recalled that I'd forgotten my clothes in my car that had broken down. So I borrowed a suit. Unfortunately, he was a Division I athlete, substantially bigger than I was. But I borrowed his suit and his size 13 shoes, which didn't fit so well on my size 10 feet. Wrapped an extra long tie around my neck, and borrowed his Suzuki Samurai. So I don't know if that car rings a bell, but it was kind of like the Jeep Wrangler, the first version of the Jeep Wrangler, but really small. Okay. And he didn't have a top on it. He used it to deliver pizzas back then. And so I show up at this interview, and it had blown my hair quite around. So I looked like, I guess, like I was going to be a rock star. So showed up with these oversized clothes and awfully like messy hair. And I went in there, and I was like taking a bow because of my heroic effort to get there. And he said, Scott, like, you're not ready, are you? Like, you don't want to work here, do you? And I was like, no, I mean, I hitchhiked 200 miles to get here. It's just unbelievable. He's like, the people that will work for me would have been at Nordstrom and figured out a way to get a suit. Like, if you're serious, like, give me a call. I think you'd be really interesting, but you're not ready, and you're not serious. Right. And so, yeah, it was a tough one. And so as I was driving home, the only thing I could think of was how I could avoid my mother and for how long. Yeah. And so it was about 2 weeks later, I finally picked up the call, her, 15th call, and she gave it to me pretty good. This was a big client of hers and a strong relationship. And, in her words, I had embarrassed her. Mm. And I made it at the shore another week, and then I just went home. And my parents had moved to Connecticut. It's not where I grew up, but in New England in the U.S. And I grew up in New York. And I moved home and made finding a job a full-time job. And back then there wasn't email, so I was sending out letters, believe it or not, and a resume. And my dad had the best advice for me. He said, where do you want to work? Which sounds so simple, but I had never thought about it. Mm. And for me, having gone through that kind of public-private failure very early on, was like it's been very meaningful to me as I've gone and grown up in this business, and have had the chance to interview thousands of people, and counsel thousands of young folks, and speak to college student after university student, and be a little empathetic, because unfortunately they don't teach you a lot when you're going through university. And so for me to land a job at the Nets was a bit of a, I don't know, I would say you could call it luck, but I had, my resume was full for a college student. It was a full resume. And I got hired as an assistant, a secretary, in a marketing group at the New Jersey Nets, which was at the time one of the kind of sad sack type organizations in sports. Could never win, could never get out of their own way. Right. But for me, boy, I will tell you, I fell in love with it. From my first day driving up to that arena. It was at the time the Continental Airlines Arena, I just fell in love. I would get there first and wait until the first person got there and let me in the door. Until 3 months in, they gave me a key.
Right.
I was always the last one to leave, and I was there on weekends, and it would be the president, the general counsel, the CFO, and that kid, because they didn't even know my name. Yeah. But I hung around quite a bit. John Spoelstra became president, whose son is now coaching the Miami Heat, another NBA team.
Wow.
And he had a reputation of developing emerging young talent. And I was one of the guys, along with Brett Yormark, who just left running Brooklyn Sports Entertainment, and Howard Newchow, who's now running CAA, the big global agency. Yeah, and I were three of the, I guess, the people that John Spoelstra had tabbed as his young talent. Fantastic. Which was amazing. I mean, I remember to the day when I was promoted out of my glorious job fetching coffee and lunch and dry cleaning, because that's essentially what I was doing. Right. And I was at the copier, and I was fixing the copier one Saturday, and John walked in and said, "What are you doing, kid?" And I said, "I'm fixing the copier." And he said, "Why are you doing that?" And I looked up at him. I said, "Because it's broken." And he laughed. He said, "What do you do here? What's your name?" And I started telling him, "Well, I'm an assistant, but here are the 15 projects I've been working on. I do most of those at night when everybody leaves." Right. He said, "Come into my office." And I thought, of course, I was getting fired. 6 months into my illustrious career at the time, I got promoted to sell sponsorships. And as a 22-year-old young man, it was quite an opportunity. I remember kind of chuckling to myself. I said, "When do I start?" He's like, "How about today?" It was a Saturday. Right. And he said, "Well, just take that office over there." And I looked at him. I said, "I get an office?" And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I think about that as one of those experiences where, I spend a lot of time with young people here, and our organization is run by millennials. We probably have 80% of our staff's probably under 27, 28 years old. Wow. We've got a 34-year-old as a president of one of our teams. And so, there are things that you take from these experiences along the way that you learn from, that hopefully impact and influence you, and you can pass on to the people you get to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I love the story, and I think calling it from the mailroom to the C-suite here, that there is definitely you have an amazing story from that, and I can imagine the learning as well as how you now take that forward, how you started and how you're nurturing talent. It's almost like the movie here. I love that. Fantastic. That's a very, very cool warm-up story. Now, maybe let's jump a little bit ahead, and before we go into, of course, the role you have right now and all the amazing things you're doing here, you have another one here, maybe your MSG days or something else you did with the NBA, which sort of fits into this sort of same category of fun stories.
Sure. Well, I remember my first days at the NBA didn't go as well as I would have hoped. I had just come off a pretty public failure. I'd started a company called Hoops TV, which was in kind of an early emerging online company. It was the number 2 most trafficked basketball site in the world behind NBA.com. Oh, right. We raised a ton of money, spent a ton of money, and then found myself out of work and out of luck and out of money, and made my way to the NBA, fortunately, thanks to a dear friend of mine who recommended me to the commissioner. I had never worked in a big company before. I'd never worked in corporate America before, or certainly New York City, and that was a tremendous adjustment for me. I really struggled. I remember there was a certain person there whose name I won't use, but she made it her business to make my transition really difficult. I was hired as a young VP. I was probably 29 years old. That's at the NBA, that's a pretty young age to be a vice president. Yeah, for sure. And she made it hard. I didn't have an office. I mean, there were managers in offices, and I was sitting out at the intern desk. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get an expense report approved for 3 months. I couldn't get a laptop. I couldn't get a phone number. A cell phone. I couldn't get any business cards. I couldn't get any help, And finally went to my boss, and he said, "How's it going?" I'm like, "This is terrible." I mean, this is awful. He's like, "What do you mean?" And I told him about some of my trials, and by that afternoon, everything had been fixed, and that frustrated me even more. Here I am 3 months kind of like flailing in the wind. And, at that point, I looked myself in the mirror and I said, if I'm ever in a leadership role where I have influence and control, I want to create the greatest place to work in the world. And I think that starts with onboarding. And I think the first 3 months, here at MSG, when I worked there, and here at Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment and the Sixers and Devils, and I think if you interviewed people here, they'd say it's pretty good, and we're certainly not perfect, but boy, are we working towards it. And later on at the NBA, and by the way, like I loved my experience at the NBA. I having a chance to work with Commissioner David Stern and then Adam Silver, the current commissioner, who ended up being a good mentor and friend and boss. I worked with some of the most incredible people in the world. I mean, even on my team there, was Tom Glick, who now runs the Carolina Panthers, Chris Granger, who runs the Detroit Tigers and Detroit Red Wings, Chris Heck, who runs the Philadelphia 76ers for us here, Amy Brooks, who runs she's the president of innovation for the NBA. Donna Daniels, who's our general manager of one of the top 10 buildings in the world, the Prudential Center. So that team, I can go on and on. They're literally like there are a dozen people running big companies that got to work at that team, which was pretty amazing. So I loved my experience there. I got to consult with over 50 teams across the NBA, WNBA, and now G League. It was like I used to say I was like getting a PhD in team sports, and I got to learn from these incredible operators. The Eric Woolworths of the world, who still runs the Heat, or Rick Welts at Golden State, Len Komorowski at the Cleveland Cavaliers. I mean, these are elite operators. So it was pretty incredible. But I had another. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, of all of them, because you're mentioning so many of these amazing people there. But if you would pick one, either person or let's say experience, how you started, let's say in your early part of the career, what is it the one which really shaped you the most, where you really felt this, and now in your leadership career role you're in now, that goes back to you, that experience? Is that early, as I said, from the mailroom, or was it, that tough time in the NBA, how you got started? What is it? Maybe one of those moments
that's a good question. I had another one where I had jumped in and volunteered to work on the WNBA, and at the time there was this kind of boy band named NSYNC, and they had just come onto the scene and were the hottest band in the world, and I had known their manager and had done some work with him in a past life, and had connected with him to do a launch of the NSYNC's album at WNBA games. At the time, they were trying to attract teenage girls. This boy band was kind of the teenage girl magnet. Yep, so I figured that was a great marriage, and they launched it there. They gave videos, they autographed stuff, they gave away merchandise. I mean, it was almost like a can't fail project, and yet it failed.
All right.
And I was about 6 months into my tenure at the NBA, and at this point, I was really frustrated. And this great HR head, his name was Jeff Robinson, called me in his office just to check in. He's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "This is the worst."
And what went wrong?
He's like, what's the worst? He's like, "This place, it's awful." He's like, "Is it the place or is it you?" And I said, "It's not me, of course. How can anything be my fault, And again, another great lesson when you're young. Oftentimes you should spend a little more time looking in the mirror, and a lot less time looking at everybody else when things go south. But nonetheless, I was at that point in my career, and I said, "Are you kidding me?" And I rattled off, I had done this and I had done that, and so-and-so didn't do this and so-and-so didn't do that. They don't know what they're doing, and I'm so smart and nobody else is. And, I'm going through, and he said, "Well, what role did you play in the failure?" And I said, "Me?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And he ended up asking me a series of questions about, my relationships and how connected I was at the NBA. And it was really an interesting question. And he said, "Well, this is a matrix. And to get things done effectively in this organization, you need to have relationships. And you need to spend time creating them. And you've only been here for 6 months, which is effectively 6 seconds." And so, and I said, "Well, I'm on the road." And he said, how often are you on the road? I said, 5 or 6 days a week. And he said, well, does that make sense? I said, well, that's where I add value. And he said, well, there's a difference between being right and being effective. And right now you may be right, but you're not effective. And I said, well, how am I supposed to do that? And he said, Scott, you seem like a smart guy. I bet you can figure it out. And so, I ended up coming off the road at first 1 day a week and eventually 2 days a week. And so I spent 1 day in New York and 1 day in our entertainment offices in New Jersey. And that, I of course would do my paperwork and busy work. But I spent time connecting with people and getting to know them and meeting them when I didn't have to ask for something and creating a window of opportunity so that when things came up, I was the one that they would call if they needed something related to the teams. And it was really interesting. Like I remember specifically being in one of David Stern's big staff meetings, not big, his 15 people staff meetings, and him saying, worried about the ratings coming up. And I think it was like a San Antonio, Indiana, or it was not two not so big markets. And they were a little fear that the ratings would be down over the previous year. And I said, well, the teams could help. And literally everybody at the table laughed.
Right.
And I remember saying, no, we can do this, And I said, and I remember a good friend of mine who's still a friend, and we do some work together. He's no longer there. Greg Winnick, who was running NBA Entertainment at the time, said, you won't get one. I said, Greg, I'll get 10 by lunchtime. Right. And sure enough, all 30 teams participated and promoted the finals that year. And because just like I had worked on relationships at the NBA, I was working on my relationships with the teams. Right. And while some people just do it just because of the relationship, others you had to convince and have that avalanche of support with the other 25 or 26 teams, which we got. But I started to get some credibility internally. And that helped. And so when my boss, Bernie Mullen, who's another wonderful soul and good friend, left to go run the Hawks and Thrashers, who are now the Winnipeg Jets, in Atlanta, I remember the commissioner calling and saying like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to give you his job. And I said, thanks. And he said, do you want to know why? I was like, no, I'm just happy to have the opportunity. He said, it's because every single person I called and asked, they said you were the right person. Wow. And, I always go back to that point. I think about that today, and I think about Jeff Robinson, and I think about the value of and meaning of relationships. And in the era of social media and email and texting and the way of the world, I don't think there's any substitute for sitting down face to face, and grabbing a meal and connecting. And I think that's the way business is done. I think that's the way you maintain relationships. I think that's the way you build culture. I mean, we do it here. We call them face to faces, and I sit down, once a week with groups of 10 to 15. Mostly or typically very young folks. And I always start the meeting the same way. I said, hey, I'm here to talk about life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. Whatever you want to talk about, let's do it. And with the young people, I have two good ingredients. One, I bring food, and two, I keep the meetings relatively short, both of which they like a lot more than my comments. But it is, it's all connected. Like, I've heard so many stories about how, you're kind of a product of your childhood. Yeah. I think the same thing applies in business. And I think we're very much a product of our experiences and the cultures from which we came and the bosses whom we had. And I'm very much living proof of that.
Definitely. And again, everything you're listening to you, besides my own career and like I've spoken to like Donald, which he talks about the same thing. For him it was all about there's certain things you cannot do over the phone. You have to be in front of the person, and I think that's what you're just sharing as well. So clearly, I think that's a great message for everyone who now is used to just texting and sending everything via some electronic messaging device. I think the face-to-face, like you call it, is so important, even in today's world, or even more in today's world. Right? So I think we're all on the same page there. And that's a great segue.
Hey, quick one, Marcus, on Donald Dell. I told him this when I first met him about it's probably 12 years ago or so. I was at Madison Square Garden, and we were working on a deal together. Yeah. And right when we finished, I said, hey, I have to tell you something before you go. And he said, what's that? I said, in college I wrote a paper about you. Yeah, he cracked up. He's like, "Oh, you're making me feel old." I said, "No, no, no. You're a hero of mine for a very long time."
Right.
So it was such a pleasure and honor to get to know him, and even better now to call him a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it was a comment I was going to make earlier. Is clearly it shows when like what you were sharing is how you really first started, right? I think your first role you mentioned that was the New Jersey Jets here, Nets here. We all fall in love to some degree with this industry. I think if you're really going to be around like we are, 20 years, 30 years, or Donald, 50 years, if you don't love this, you're not going to be doing it, right? There's money to be made, of course, and all that fun stuff which we get with it, the perks. But I think there is a true love affair, or how would you describe it?
I think that's right. I would say though, where I've seen people slip and fall is, I think they fall in love with the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you fall in love with the energy, I think that's wonderful. If you fall in love with the way that sports can influence and impact a community and drive a business, I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
If you fall in love with the games, you can just be a fan, and you shouldn't work in this business. And it's not that I don't love the games. Of course, I enjoy going to 76er games and New Jersey Devil games and our Dignitas events. Of course, I absolutely love it. But that's not what I'm in love with. I'm in love with the power and influence and community building that sports provides in an era of nonsense and political clashes and unsettling comments and people escaping in their phones and social media. This is the community building that I fell in love with. Like this builds. This is where you come to a game and you high five a perfect stranger.
Yes.
And you sing and dance like you were a kid.
Yep.
And you find community and you find family amongst the sea of strangers. And I think that's why that's what I've fallen in love with. And not that everyone has to fall in love with exactly what I fall in love with, but I would fall in love with something other than, hey, I'm a big fan. I love Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
I don't think that's made for a career in this business.
No, and I would totally agree. I think especially in our roles where we are clearly on the commercial side of the business, right, running companies or running venues and teams. If you're too much of a fan, like you rightly said, I think you fall in love with the wrong thing, right? You have to be that objective. You have to still look at it as a business. But as you rightly said, what sports can do, what it can deliver to the communities, as well as in a larger scheme of things. I always say there's nothing in the world which creates the impact in a country than the country winning, the World Cup or major sporting event, which is maybe the biggest sport in the country. There's nothing on the planet the president or the whoever it is, the leader of the country can do besides winning that. And so that power, and I think the positive energy coming out of that is amazing. So, and let's continue a bit in that direction, because I think that's a perfect segue into what you're currently doing, of course, at Harris Blitzer. Sorry. In your role there, you're leading not just one organization. Obviously, you have multiple parties there. And I don't know how you juggle all the different things you're doing there. But share a little bit of what it is. I think I've read about the philosophies you have, the corporate culture, again, the community service, which you guys talking about. But talk a bit about how that translates to the team itself rather than maybe the fans. So look at it maybe from a team point of view, and then we'll talk a bit about the fans as well.
Sure. Well, I always think success is predominantly the team business. We have a lot of ancillary businesses around the teams. But generally, the team business, it has to start at the top. And I'm really fortunate to work for some incredible people. Josh Harris is one of the co-founders of Apollo Global Management, and David Blitzer is one of the chief's top people at Blackstone, which is the largest private equity firm in the world. So you have two elite deal makers who are as good of people as they are deal makers. And having spent quite a bit of time kind of aligning on values and vision with them, we have a really good mandate, and they're, these are good people. They're wonderful husbands. They each have 5 children. They're terrific fathers. They believe that sports is a vehicle to make the world a better place. They are committed and kind of obsessed with winning, and they believe that culture drives performance. And so when I was going through my transition and interviewing with them, it was almost too good to be true. And it's lived up to all those billings and more. And a lot of it has to do with them. We've been assembled what I would argue is the most talented sports organization in the world, present company excluded, of course. But Hugh Weber runs the team business, and, Procter and Gamble background, went through some incredible transitions with the Pelicans, now in the New Orleans Pelicans. Chris Heck runs the 76ers, again, longtime football, American soccer exec, longtime NBA exec, and baseball before that. And works with me at the NBA. Jake Reynolds is kind of maybe the most talented, emerging, young, kind of culture-building executive I've ever been around, who's running the New Jersey Devils. Adam Davis, he's kind of our global ambassador. He's in China more often than I am, but he's our kind of chief deal maker. Laura Price is our COO, who's been at this organization, has like additional knowledge that you can't put a price tag on. I could go on and on. Like we have, I think we've got 15 executives that either are running big organizations or will be some point in their career. This is it's a powerhouse, and it's allows me to have fun. And I will say, like, I've never had more fun in my life. I've never had more fun in my career. I'm really proud of kind of what we do and how we do it. I think you touched on our community effort here. When you sign up to work here, you pledge 76 hours of service into the community, and we'll shut down the office once a month and go serve. And we could be packing meals for the military, or feeding the homeless, or, as I like to say, walking the elderly across the street. I don't care what you do, but you better figure out some way to coach, mentor, teach, and make this world better. And it's a great commitment. And again, it's really consistent with how Josh and David see the world. And I'm the steward of these franchises on their behalf and on the behalf of the cities where we live, work, and play.
That's amazing. Now, one question I had, it's always easy when the team does well, right? And clearly right now, both the Sixers and the Devils are doing well. But, it wasn't always that way, right? Especially 76ers, from what I remember, several years, I guess, we're necessarily performing at the top level. And I'm sure that's harder, right? And I'm sure, not everyone comes in happily in the office in the morning after, a weekend or after a match that got lost. So, what's the difference there? And how do you keep that momentum, and how did you build up, that sort of winning mentality?
Sure. So we did go through a 3-year period where we had the worst win-loss percentage in the history of the NBA over a 3-year period. So we went through a pretty lean time on the basketball court. The good news was that we were pretty committed. Not pretty committed. We were committed to a long-term strategy. And so just like we do today with all of our decisions in business, and like we do today with all of our decisions on the ice and on the court and in front of the screen, if it's Dignitas, is that we want to make the best decisions for the franchise, which aren't, obviously they aren't always the right decisions. We made plenty of mistakes, but we always have a long-term view. We want to be, we're very well aware, you mentioned it earlier, of the impact and influence that a winning team can have on a community. And it can be a community, it can be a city, it can be a state, it can be a country.
Yeah.
And in our case, like, we understand that obligation, and we also understand, like, it doesn't happen overnight. And there are, in many cases, 29 or 31 or 57 other teams in your league fighting just as hard as you are, Absolutely. Who have just as many resources and are as smart or smarter. And so we have a very much a long-term view, much like you would if you were a private equity investor, so to speak. Right. So we definitely have a long-term view. However, the culture here has always been good. So one year we won actually 10 games, 10 out of 82 in the NBA is not a lot of games.
Nope.
And we almost beat the record. The record was 9. and that was not a record we wanted to beat. Yeah. So we finished with 10 wins, and though I would come in here, and it's not like I didn't have bad days, because of course I did. I had plenty of days where I was down, disappointed, frustrated, angry, and I would come in here, and we just had this incredible light and spirit, and people are happy here, and so if it were my day to be down in the dumps, somebody would come in and pat me on the back and give me some encouraging words, and I'd pop right back into it. Because at the end of the day, it's like you tell your children, there are only a few things you can control, and one of them is your attitude. And so we had that in spades here. So that was actually something I think we did really well.
Yeah, and again, at the end of the day, that boils down to the corporate culture, right? Which you built even when you started, I guess, and it wasn't winning seasons and it wasn't all going well. So if you were able to do it at that time, of course, when it gets, when the sun comes up and it all works well, even more. I think that's an interesting lesson there, or great. So. But if you really compare the two, is there a big difference between a winning season and not so winning season, or you really just at the end of the day you say, hey, there's another match or another game coming up, there's another season coming, so you know what, we're in there for the long haul, and it doesn't matter really.
No, I have a competitive problem, so I definitely love winning. I will say I learned my lesson though pretty early on with my wife Lisa. We were going through a similar transition in New York when I first got to New York, and we effectively took a very long view there. We came out of it a little quicker, but same type of thing. And I came home really mad one night. She's like, "What are you all mad about?" And I was like, "We lost by 25 points tonight." It's New York Knicks. Right. And she said, "So are the Knicks going to be good this year?" I was like, "No." Right. She said, "Well, how many games do you win?" I said, "I don't know. I think we'll win like 25 to 30." She's like, "Okay." What about the Rangers? I said, no, not much better this year, unfortunately. She said, how many games are you going to win there? I said, probably the same. She's like, okay, how about the Liberty? I said, I think the Liberty will be better. She's like, okay, how many games are you going to lose there? I was like, I don't know, maybe 15. She's like, okay, so that's 115 losses. So you're going to be pissed, mad, angry, and frustrated 1 out of every 3 nights. I just want to make sure what I know I'm signing up for. Right. And it was like a really interesting bounce back for me to understand what she was saying and what lesson she was teaching me there, which was, hey, my man, however long you need to get yourself right before you get home, do it in the car. And when you get home, flip back out of it, because there's a whole world out here. And I thought that was a bit of a watershed moment for me in terms of how I manage my disappointment and frustration on against losing, because I definitely take losses harder than I enjoy wins. And that's not a great quality to have in this business.
Yeah,
especially if you're dealing with multiple teams.
Exactly. You'll have your losses.
And so I've definitely learned how to better deal with it and compartmentalize the frustration. And I'm doing much better at that. But that being said, winning is so much fun. It is. We have the 76ers in particular right now are a team that will compete for a championship this year. And if we stay healthy, and that's really fun. It's fun to see the city come alive. It's fun to see the buzz. We made huge improvements and steps on the Devils side as well, and bring in these kind of mega stars. We drafted first overall Jack Hughes, and brought in PK Subban, who's like a global superstar. So for us, it's 2 teams on the rise, and it has been kind of a dream come true. But it's definitely more fun when you're winning, and business is better, and business is easier. Okay. And I look a lot smarter, and my whole team looks like we're better. We have a saying in the United States that, they always say that the soda tastes better, the popcorn tastes better, the hot dogs taste better when your team's winning.
Yeah, that's true.
When you're losing, it feels like, fans get frustrated and can kind of get you on just about everything.
No, absolutely, and that's interesting. I mean, like I said, you have been in that for so long, but as you already said, you still maybe get upset when the team loses, or at least it maybe has a tough loss, I guess, and it doesn't go away, right? It hurts, and that's the same with, I don't run teams, but when the teams I support, when they lose, it still puts me down, and but you got to get up, and dust yourself off, and that's what sports was all about as well. So interesting. I want to touch a little bit on a couple other things, which is sits within the organization. That's obviously you're in the you're having an esports team, as well as you have this sort of, what you call the innovation lab, which I'm assuming is some sort of an incubation lab for, new technology and other things. So tell me a bit about how you see how all that is influencing the real world of sport, which is really where you started and what we've been talking about the whole time now. How do you see this new emerging space, from esports to others, influencing, the world we're in?
Sure. Well, esports, I mean, you certainly can't deny the global audience and appeal of esports. It's unmatched. And so we're an early adopter into esports. I think this is our third or fourth year. And we've learned quite a few lessons and taken even more lumps as we continue to kind of lead from the front. We've tripped and fallen several times. We finally have kind of landed on a really, really impressive CEO named Mike Prindiville, and kind of merged with the Houston Rockets organization, which has been a good meshing. And Delaware North, which is a huge concessionaire in the state. So we think we have the right partners, which I think has been really exciting. The team business is a tough business to be in currently. It's a sponsorship-based model, and I don't think the market is caught up with the escalating cost of the teams. I think that emerges over time, and the value of the teams is certainly growing at a ridiculously rapid rate. I think the ecosystem, though, to us is really interesting. You mentioned the innovation lab we have here. We also have an early stage investment fund called HBSE Ventures. And we've made some investments. I mean, two in particular in the esports space. One's called U.GG, which is a training and development platform for a game called League of Legends, which has been incredible. I mean, 8 months in, they had 1 billion page views. I mean, they just moved down to Austin, Texas. Incredibly talented base of executives running that team. And so Shingo and Alan, and that has been a really interesting kind of journey as we've started to learn, and they've emerged as these elite executives. Another one, Stream Metrics, which is kind of like the Nielsen, if you will, for esports, which will become kind of the preeminent measuring stick for brands who want to spend in esports. So we have the two really good investments in esports alongside Dignitas, which we like a lot. And I think for us, and I'd say for all of the sports organizations out there, that we have these incredible platforms, and we talked about the impact and influence you can have in the community, which is for sure. But also there's an incredible opportunity to leverage these platforms, especially us. We have these multiple teams. And my partners, Josh and David, also own Crystal Palace in the Premier League. So we have these 4 platforms where we can test and try and exhibit the products we invest in. So, that's been really, really exciting. I mean, we've got Home Court is another incredible. It's worth downloading if you play basketball. It's kind of like an AI version of basketball skills and training. I actually have my girls on it, but it actually tracks every shot you take, the angle, the bend of your knee, the trajectory of the ball, how high you jump off the ground. It's got like AI version of dribbling skills and drills, which we do in my kitchen. And it's an early stage company, but they've had 100 million shots tracked so far. So wow. Pretty incredible company. Old Apple tech guys, pretty amazing.
And that's all, and that's what sits within the Sixers Innovation Lab, is it? The sort of examples you were just talking about.
Some are in the lab. One of those in the lab, and 2 are from our venture fund. Venture fund's a little more later stage.
Okay. So this is the Elevate Sports Venture. That's the fund you're talking about, or?
No, that's a different business.
That's
Elevate,
another different business. All right,
yeah. That's our venture fund. Elevate is an incredible business. We have.
Tell me a bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, early stage. So we're partners with Live Nation, and they're the largest concert promoters in the world.
Yes.
And also, they also own Ticketmaster, which is the largest ticketing company in the world. So it's a really big company.
You got the 49ers in there, so you got an interesting mix of people, group of.
And OVG, and they'll be building 11 arenas and stadiums over the course of the next 3 years. So you have an incredible group of partners, and we're looking to help organizations kind of optimize their arenas or stadiums, build arenas and stadiums. We're working with the new NHL team in Seattle, Miami, the new football club in Miami. We're working with the XFL, a new startup football league. So we've got, this venture is a year old. We've got 25 some odd clients. Like, it's pretty amazing. Al Guido's the CEO there, and he is the the future leader in this business, in my opinion. Right. So that's been a really fun business to start up, and
is it supposed to rival the Anschutz group a bit, or is that sort of a bit the direction and focus on arenas and stadiums? In a
maybe. Tim Lewicki, who was the founder of, he was the guy who essentially created AEG.
Yes.
He runs OVG, so he's our partner in Elevate.
Right.
So yes, so we've got a very similar vision and view to it. But again, Dan Beckerman at AEG, a really good friend and an incredible leader, and so you find in this business, I'm sure you found this in your career, is that you find there are more frenemies in this business than anywhere. Like your best friend you end up competing against on a certain part of the business, and then the next day you're partnering on something else. And so we're fortunate enough to be partners with a lot of these guys, and then competing with them on other parts of their business, which it's been fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So I know we're running a little late here. I've realized we spent a bit of time on things, but that's all great. There isn't an exact rule of thumb of all the things we want to cover. But maybe quickly, let's have a quick talk a bit about the world outside of the United States and the things you guys are doing, maybe to bring the game into Asia, into Europe or other parts of the world. What do you see there? What's happening, and how you involved in this?
Sure. Well, China is where we're spending quite a bit of time. The basketball market in China is off the charts. At least if you believe the facts and figures, which I have experienced. You've got 300 million people playing basketball in China. 300 million people. We had a preseason game there last year. They said 55 million people watched the preseason game. We're considered a top 5 team in China by kind of Weibo engagement and followers, and a top 7 hockey team for the Devils. And so we have 3 full-time native Chinese employees here, 2 in content and 1 in sponsorship. Yeah, they're incredibly talented young folks. So our and while my Mandarin stops at ni hao, this younger generation of global citizens seem to all speak multiple languages and can effectively and efficiently walk across multiple channels, and so I'm there. I go along for the ride. I mean, we think from with we have players from the 76ers. Think about this; it's kind of crazy. They come from 5 continents. You almost like on a team of 15 guys, hailing from 5 continents is almost like unthinkable. Yeah. And the Devils, we got guys from 8 countries on the New Jersey Devils playing hockey. So speaking 7 languages. Like this is the world is smaller. Sure. And if you're anywhere in the world listening to this podcast and you think you're at the center of it, and I don't care if you're in New York, London, Beijing, Singapore, like Jakarta, like you're not in the center of the world. The world is one, and the fact that sports can bridge some of this and bring us together and pull us together is the gift that we all share. But it is a small global world, and for those of us who are our age, I think it's a bit of an adjustment, different for you. You've lived all over the world, I tell you, for those in America who are listening to this, like we are so kind of America centric, and I think there is incredible opportunity outside of our borders. And so for us, I personally travel to China 3 or 4 times a year, and I fall in love with the country, the people, the food, the experience, their love of sports, the way they engage consumers, the way I think the media is kind of a new way to experience sports through digital media, and through that I've made friends, and I feel blessed every time I'm there. Derek Chang, I don't know if you know anybody who runs the NBA China, become a good friend and an incredible executive. He's doing an incredible job there. And the NHL, I know hockey's not a huge sport in China yet.
Yep.
But I know there's been a focus and a mandate from President Xi to have more participation in winter sports with the coming Olympics.
Correct.
And so I think you're going to see more people fall in love with this game of hockey, and we hope to play over there as well.
Yeah, well, Beijing actually has a team now. I don't know if you're aware of. They play in the Russian league, but it's placed in Beijing. So this is again part of the lead up to the Olympics, of course. So clearly in the larger scheme of things, ice hockey is still quite small, but you never know. I'm sure it will eventually grow. And the NBA, of course, as we all know, is huge already in China and large across Asia in general. It is and the players, as you said, come from all over the world. Obviously, we recently had the World Championship in China. I'm sure you followed that a bit as well.
Of course.
So the world is getting smaller and Asia is getting bigger in a sense, or more important, I think, as well. So a lot of the learnings of the way the professionalism, I think the way the American sports industry is run across the board, not just from a club point of view, but even when we look at the leagues, of course, I think Asia can learn a lot of it. And that's part of the reason we're doing the podcast as well, to really learn from the best. And you guys are right up there, in terms of your own organization and of course the organization you've worked in with before. So really appreciate all that feedback. I think it was fun as always. We're running out of time here, so I want to thank you for the time we had with you in the morning here. Scott, I'm sure we'll talk again some more in the future, and best of luck with the season this year, and hope we'll talk again when you win it.
Good. I hope you get to the States sometime soon, other than for the U.S. Open, but maybe we'll connect next time I'm out your way. Awesome.
That would be great.
I wish you the best of luck, Marcus. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.